The vast, deep ocean. Its depths have fascinated us since time immemorial, and for me, it has always been a source of comfort. I can thank my entire life to the ocean. My parents met one another on a Caribbean cruise. Several years later, they conceived me during another cruise, and I was even born above the tranquil waters during a third cruise. Not the most responsible thing to go on a cruise while pregnant, but then again, I came nearly a month early. And the first memory I can even remember from my early childhood was watching the waves crash down on the beach. A peaceful and happy memory, very unlike the rest of my childhood. You see, when I was young, I suffered from night terrors and a crippling fear of the dark. From the corner of every room, I would see them. Some small, dog-like creature with human limbs skittering across the floor, a face staring at me from behind the curtains, thousands of living tendrils dangling in the closet, or those arms that would reach out from under my bed. But with a flick of the light, they would vanish. It's standard child stuff, I suppose, but for me it was much worse. A vivid imagination, the doctors told my parents. But to me it was real. Very real. It nearly drove me to madness. But then one fateful day, my father took me out on his boat. We went fishing. And it changed everything. Once I was above the water, my fear fled and I could finally relax. And from that day onward, I spent every conceivable moment in or above the waters. Even as an adult, I never really overcame my fears, and would often see things still creeping through the dark. But now I just ignore them. I'm sure this comes as no real surprise, but now I am a marine biologist, specializing in the deep sea. And unlike the darkness on land, the deep abyss below the waves fills me with tranquility. "Dr. Anders, everything is ready," a voice called out from outside my cabin. It was one of the technicians. "Oh, thanks, I'll head up now." He nodded and walked away, heading back towards the deck. I still can't get over it. A doctor. After 9 long years, I'm finally a doctor. And this was my reward. After graduating from the University of Rhodes, my supervisor, Kyle, offered me an amazing opportunity. He was working in collaboration with the US military. They developed a new type of submersible vehicle, and we would get to test it. And they get the operational data, and we get a look down into the Middle American Trench, and we get to stay down there for 3 full days. I quickly left my cabin, stepping out into the old metal walkway. A gentle breeze stirred, rustling through my short hair. I paused for a moment, staring out over the endless water, taking a deep breath of the salty breeze, savoring the feeling while I still could. 3 days. It was gonna be taxing, but so rewarding. We would see and record things never before seen by human eyes. I stood there, taking in the scenery for a moment, and then turned away and hurried down towards the deck. The deck was a large expanse of metal, filled with many people, and they were scurrying between the various pieces of technology dotted around. But what really stood out was the 2 cranes standing tall in the center of the deck. Dangling from the nearest crane sat a long black object. It looked like a sphere, but with one half tapering backwards, ending in a point, with 3 fins attached to that tapered tail. It was around 20 meters long and 4 meters thick. It looked like something straight from a sci-fi movie, entirely uniform black from the outside. No seams were visible at all, and even the glass just looked like another piece of its body. The machine was the pinnacle of military technology. It drew seawater into a chamber, which via electrolysis separated it into hydrogen and oxygen. The oxygen kept us breathing, and the hydrogen fueled the submarine. And that's probably all I'm allowed to say about its technical specifications, especially if I want this recording to see the light of day. But essentially, the only thing keeping this submarine from staying down forever was the passengers. Each of these new submarines can hold a maximum of 2 people, and I would be going down with a military pilot, a man named Keith McGregor. "Yo, Doc, you ready to find some of those strange fishies?" A voice called from behind me. A short but well-built man with fiery red hair was waving at me. He was dressed in a blue jumpsuit with a patch on his arm, and the word U.S. Navy and McGregor ran across his chest. "Yeah, I can't wait." "Great, let's get you prepped." The next hour and a half that followed was just a lot of boring talking, many safety checks, and walking through all of the protocols. But eventually we finally got ready to go. We entered the submarine from a hatch on its roof, which was all but invisible until it opened. We descended a short ladder into a small airlock, sealed the hatch above us, opened another hatch in the floor, and climbed down another ladder. This brought us into a well-lit but cramped metal interior. The entire sub was quite small. It had a small corridor running down its length. On the left was a bunk bed embedded into the wall, and there was a small folding table stored in the wall, and 2 small folding chairs. Behind that sleeping arrangement sat a small door which led into a tiny bathroom. On the right sat a small kitchen, and down from that another small door leading to a cramped shower. Going down the hall, it terminated into a small room which opened to the engines. But on the other side was the part that really excited me. It opened into a large room with a massive circular dome of glass, showing the world outside our submarine. In front of the glass sat 2 large chairs with a large curved table fitted along the interior of the glass. Embedded in this table were hundreds of dials, switches, gauges, and small LCD displays. And in front of the chair to the right stood 2 large joysticks, surrounded by many buttons and flashing lights. On the sides of the submarine, near the end of the glass, were 2 large curved displays, showing the feeds from the exterior cameras. I sat down on the leftmost chair and strapped myself in. Keith did the same to the right. A dull creak echoed around us as the crane started to move, slowly swinging us out over the water. A buzz sounded, followed by a static voice. "You're good to go. We're decoupling in 3, 2, 1. And then my stomach jumped into my throat as the crane let go. The front of the sub angled down as we rushed towards the water. I gripped my chair tight as we plunged through the surface. You would normally expect a large pressurized tank to bob back to the surface, but instead we kept going down, straight like an arrow fired from a bow. We just kept sinking, only slowing ever so much. This sub utilized a new next-generation technology, which allowed for better pressure compensation, allowing us to descend much faster than normal. As the water rushed past us, the light quickly faded, from the light blue of the surface to a deeper blue, and eventually down to pitch black. Keith deftly flicked at some of the switches on the control panel, and the black void in front of us turned to a bright green. We could now see far into the distance, which showed pretty much the same as before, but at least now we could see the occasional fish swimming past us as we plunged into the depths. Keith turned to me and said, "So Doc, what do you think of this night vision system, huh?" He gestured at the glass. "It's incredible," I muttered while staring out into the verdant expanse. "I can't even pick up any distortions. Everything looks tinted green but crystal clear." I was staring out with amazement, and then Keith chuckled and said, "And we got the cameras coded too. You're gonna get some pretty amazing footage from them fishies." The sub started to slow its descent, and suddenly something massive shot past us. Long tendrils grabbed at the sub, sharp protrusions clicked into the glass, as the entire sub groaned in protest. Huh, Dositicus gigas, the Humboldt squid. It must be hungry, because we're a lot bigger than it can handle. But Keith didn't seem to be enjoying this at all, and shouted, "Damn it, he's running away from that!" pointing forward, showing the massive form of the sperm whale barreling towards us. It was trying to get a hold of this runaway squid. Keith was frantically pushing buttons, and the sub lurched downwards, dodging that hungry maw of the whale. But the squid had a tight grip on the sub, and and was dragged down along with us. I frantically looked around the glass, trying to see the whale. Then I caught a glimpse of it on the side screens, those showing the cameras above us. I must admit Keith was doing an amazing job as he dodged the whale again, and we were descending fast. So fast that it seemed the squid finally had enough of us, and darted off the sub. But the whale noticed, giving pursuit to that runaway squid. Keith let out a sigh of relief. Whoa, I've never seen anything like that before. The camo on this thing might actually be too good. Keith, are you okay there, buddy? You look kind of red. He looked over at me, showing his bloodshot eyes. No worries, His voice trailed off as he started to spasm in his chair, white foam leaking from the corners of his mouth. I jumped out of my chair, but was quickly dragged back by the harness holding me in place. I frantically fumbled with the buckles, trying to free myself, but in my panic I took far longer than I normally would to free myself. Eventually I got to my feet and stumbled over to Keith, but by the time I got to him, the seizure had already stopped. I placed my fingers gently onto his neck, feeling for a pulse, which faintly greeted my fingers. Damn it, the pressure compensator might not be as good as they thought. I knelt next to Keith, loosening his buckles, and then I was flung upwards, slamming into the roof of the sub, and everything went dark. My eyes crept open. Dim red light filled my vision. I blinked several times, clearing my vision, looking out onto the cockpit of the sub. It seemed to be perfectly undamaged. I pushed my arms down against the cold steel below me, slowly lifting myself up, as a dull pounding filled my head. I made my way back to my feet and reached up, probing my head. I winced and pulled my hand away from the massive lump on the back of my skull. Ow! But at least I'm mostly fine, right? And then I remembered Keith. I looked around and spotted him lying in the corner of the room on the floor. I slowly approached him. His left arm was at a very unnatural angle, and a small amount of blood trickled from his ears. Keith? Buddy, can you hear me? I gently shook him, but he didn't respond. I considered carrying him to the beds, but in that moment, I didn't think I had the strength enough to move him. And furthermore, moving someone with unknown injuries is probably not such a good idea either. I flopped down into Keith's chair, closed my eyes for a moment, and took a deep breath to calm myself. I opened my eyes again, taking in the vista in front of me. A pitch-black expanse filled the glass. I guess the night vision was damaged by the crash. I looked down at the control panel. One of the panels showed a red exclamation sign. This was one of the few panels I properly understood, and flicked the switch next to it. The red light turned off, plunging me into darkness for a brief second before the standard white lights came back on. I pressed another button on the panel, activating the two-way radio. Hello, this is Dr. Anders from the U.S. Experimental Expedition, Alpha 14732. The pilot has suffered a catastrophic seizure. I am requesting emergency rescue. I released the button, but only static filled the cockpit, and then silence. I waited a few minutes and tried again. No response. Damn it, did the comms get damaged? I was frustrated. I knew they would eventually find us, but I just hoped that Keith would hold on long enough for rescue. I had basic medical training, but a seizure was a bit outside my area of expertise. I looked around the cockpit, trying to get a clear image from the cameras, but the screens only showed static and more darkness. I pressed a few buttons, toggling between different cameras. The back camera showed nothing. The back side camera showed nothing. Top camera showed... Wait, what is that? It looked very similar to the broken cameras. But there is something there. Wait, it's a rock. A large stone slab resting on top of the camera. I tried the camera above the cockpit, and it just showed empty water above. But just to the right I could make it out. A large wall of stone heading up into the distance. From what I could see, it looks like the sub was now resting on the floor of the trench, wedged between the floor and the right wall of the trench. Now, I'm not an expert at piloting the sub, but I do know the basics, and I could maybe get us out, but if we were wedged down here, getting us out could break apart the sub, and then we'd both die. I'm sorry, Keith. Hang on, buddy. I'm sure they'll come for us soon. And I did nothing. 3 hours later, there was still no communication on the radio. I spent that time trying to treat Keith's injuries. I placed a pillow under his head, elevated his legs, and set his broken arm as well as I could. All the while, he just sat there, unmoving, not making a sound. But at least the rhythmic movement of his chest told me he was still breathing. 5 more hours passed. No communications. I spent that time reading the manuals we had and checking the parts I had access to. From what I could tell, the sub seemed to be in working condition. The water filters were fine, oxygen production was at 100%, the gas mixtures were still at safe levels, the power was stable. And eventually I started to get hungry, so I checked out our stores, and we had plenty of food, far more than we needed. The two of us could probably spend 2 weeks down here before having to worry about food. We had a mixture of both canned and fresh food, so I took out one of the loaves of bread, cut some thick slices from it, buttered them, added some slices of cold ham and chicken, a dash of mustard, and then closed the sandwich. I carried my sandwich down the corridor, sat back down in the cockpit's chair, slowly nibbling at it while watching that black expanse outside. In all honesty, I should be terrified. This, for most people, would be a nightmare, stuck here at the bottom of the ocean with no way out. But I was strangely calm. This place seemed peaceful, and soon my eyes drifted close. Next thing I knew, I found myself floating, water gently cradling me. The darkness filled my vision, but I felt very calm. And I heard it, a faint sound. Something was calling out to me. Michael, Michael. A soft and gentle voice called out. And then I felt it. Something cold gently grabbed hold of my hand, holding it like a loving parent would. Welcome back. And then I jolted awake, and I found myself standing in front of the window, hand pressed to the glass. I guess I was sleepwalking, and that's not good. But the peace I felt in that dream, it followed me to the waking world, and I spent the next few hours in this peaceful malaise. But eventually I did snap out of that peaceful state and checked up on Keith. He was alive, but still unresponsive. I checked the radio again. Nothing. So I went to my bag, extracted my cell phone, and proceeded to waste the rest of the day flipping through the apps on my phone and catching up on the articles and books I had downloaded before coming down here. Time passed quickly enough, and I soon found my eyes drifting close again. Once again, I found myself floating in the pitch-black water. I felt something gently pat my shoulder, and it whispered, "You're back." I could feel the water gently sway past, as if something very large swam by me. But instead of dread, this filled me with this feeling of safety. It whispered again, "We're glad you stayed. We get so lonely." Something cold caressed my cheek. I awoke to find myself standing in the airlock. What the hell? Did I climb up the ladder in my sleep? This was very wrong, and it was very disturbing. Even the peaceful feeling I got from the dreams couldn't override my worry. If I had messed with the wrong button, I could have flooded the sub and killed both of us. I had never sleepwalked before, so what the hell was going on? I stood there thinking through the problem, and then I heard it. Help! I rushed down the ladder and followed the sound into the cockpit. Keith's eyes were open, and he smiled when he saw me run into the room. I hurried over to his side, and he said with a raspy voice, "Water." I quickly rushed to the kitchen, grabbed a glass of water, and ran back to the room. I kneeled by his side and offered him the water. He raised his good hand to try to grab the glass, but his arm was shaking violently. "Oh, it's okay. Here." I gently raised the glass to his lips and slowly poured a small amount into his mouth. After a few minutes, he stopped drinking, and I took the glass away. I looked down at him and asked, "Keith, how are you feeling?" He looked down at his body and scowled, clearly frustrated. "These damn legs won't move, and this useless arm won't stop shaking." Keith paused, looked up at me and said, "What's the situation with the sub?" "The comms are down, I think, but the ship's intact. But we're wedged into the trench's wall." He scowled again. "Damn it. And the engines?" They're working, but I was too worried to move us since it could..." Okay. We need to unwedge the ship, then hit the emergency surfacing system. You need to be my arms, okay?" I nodded. "Great. You need to carry me to your chair and strap me in." "But you're injured. Moving you is a really bad idea." But he was adamant. "Don't worry about that. Just help me up." So I followed his orders. I stood up, walked behind him, grabbed him from under his armpits, and lifted him up. He grunted through clenched teeth as I dragged him to the leftmost chair. I hoisted him up into the chair and buckled him into the seat. His legs hung limp down the chair. And then I sat down in the right chair. "Okay, press that button there, the red one with the wavy pattern. No, not that one. Yeah, that one." I pressed the button and it quickly changed the display on one of the LCDs. It showed the silhouette of the submarine, with several blinking dots along its outline. "Those dots are the collision sensors. How much force and where it's put on the sub. Pull that lever down, slowly. Slowly maneuver us out. Watch those dots. If they turn yellow, be careful. If they turn red, pull back." I grabbed the joysticks, slowly pushing forward. A loud, grinding sound echoed around us. "Okay, steady. Move forward. A bit more to the left. Okay. Forward again." Keith was being very patient and guided me gently. The sub slowly moved forward, making this horrid sound, and then a blinking yellow light. "Okay, more to the right. 2 more yellow lights. Damn it. Okay, left. 3 more yellow lights. What the?" Blinking red lights all along the tail. "Keep pulling, just a bit more." And all the lights on the sub plunged out. Stop! I gently let go of the joysticks. The cockpit once again filled with dim red lights. I looked over the Keith. What happened?" "The tail. It's pinned. We must have knocked some rocks out of the wall and pinned us in place." He was speaking gently, but he seemed really, really angry. "Damn it!" he yelled out. "I'm sorry." "No, it's not your fault. I guess we're waiting for help then. Flick that switch, would you?" He was still very frustrated. And I flicked the switch, and then something above us sparked and plunged the entire sub into darkness. But looking down, the LCDs and the LEDs on the control panel still shone brightly. "Oh, come on!" Keith yelled again. I pulled out my phone and turned on the torch. The next few hours were spent checking the submarine systems. It seemed something burned out in the lighting subsystem, but the rest of the sub still had power. We still had oxygen and water, and the kitchen still worked. but we had to now sit illuminated only by the light of our phones and the LCDs around the sub. And it turned out Keith was not the most pleasant person to be trapped with. I can't really blame him since his body was now broken, and he was very frustrated. But everything made him angry, and he yelled quite often. This was a very bad situation, but before I was still calm. Now that calm was broken. "Damn it, I'm hungry," Keith angrily muttered. "Okay, I'll make us something to eat." A strange look came over Keith's face, but he just nodded. I stood up and headed to the kitchen, opened 2 cans of soup, filled a pot, and slowly simmered them on the stove. After they got nice and warm, I prepared 2 bowls and took them back into the dark cockpit. I fed Keith before digging into my own bowl. After dinner, I cleaned the dishes, and I had then planned on excusing myself and getting some sleep, but Keith seemed full of energy and kept pestering me to make conversation, keeping me up the whole night. And then when I was preparing breakfast the next morning, he finally fell asleep. So I ate my breakfast and then got into bed myself and fell asleep as well. I then found myself again in darkness, but the water felt different. It flowed in strange ways. There was this strong current pulling at me. The peaceful atmosphere was not here anymore, and then the whispers came. "We want him." I was very confused as something brushed past me. "Give him to us." I suddenly woke again, staring down at the sleeping form of Keith. I stumbled backwards, startled by my own actions, and turned around, looking back out into the darkness outside the submarine, hoping to find that calm feeling. But staring back at me from that darkness was a face. Empty black eyes on a pure white, almost human face. Long, thin, razor-sharp teeth rimmed its mouth. I stared into the abyss of its eyes for a long moment when I heard it. So faintly I cannot even really be sure I heard it. "We want him." I was no stranger to seeing faces in the darkness, but this is the first time it ever happened to me while I was in water. But the strangest part was that the face didn't fill me with fear. "Doc, is that you?" A voice called out behind me. "Yes, sorry, Keith. I was just checking on the radio. I thought I heard something." The next 2 days were torture. Keith wouldn't let me read. He either kept trying to make conversation or asking me to check some system or some part of the sub that was still working and didn't really need checking at all. But that wasn't the worst part. What bothered me was ever so often I would see that face outside the window again, asking for Keith. And it was starting to get on my nerves. Why haven't they come already? I was complaining mostly to myself, but Keith still replied. "That's the sub's cloaking system. It's state-of-the-art. They're probably trying, but they can't pinpoint us." I looked over at him from my chair, ignoring that face once again pressed to the window. "Damn it, how long do you think it'll take?" "A week, 2 at most." "Wait, that long?" "Well, yeah. Luckily, we're still on our original route, because they need to search the trench and then make visual contact with us, and only then arrange a rescue team." I sighed. I didn't know if I could last another week. The face was bothering me big time, and it had now followed me into my dreams. Whenever I fell asleep, that face would be swimming around me, begging me to give him Keith. And I kept telling it I can't, but it never listens. It's so damn annoying. Keith then yawned and said, "I'm getting tired. Could you carry me to the bed?" I stood up and dragged him to his bed, tucked him in, and then headed back to the cockpit. I sat down in one of the chairs, staring out into the depths, and the face appeared again, staring at me, then slowly turned around, looking back at something into the darkness, and fled. but a strange calmness overcame me, and I soon found myself drifting among the calm waters again. I looked out into the darkness, and suddenly they blinked into existence. Thousands of those same faces, swimming around me. But this time they were more peaceful, gracefully gliding through the water. And something else was here too. Something much larger, gliding just outside of my vision. And it whispered to me, "I see my children have been bothering you." And something gently took hold of my hand as we started to move through the abyss. A dim spot of light appeared in front of us. As we drew closer, the light grew brighter and bigger, soon surrounding us. An image resolved, and I found myself looking down into my childhood bedroom. However, it was filled with nightmare creatures, undulating as they moved through the room, unnatural limbs moving at unnatural angles. A strange joy could be seen on their faces, and I could see the young me cowering under the sheets. The image slowly faded to black, and then I found myself looking down at a small fishing boat, gently drifting over the gentle waves. It was the first fishing trip Dad ever took me on. Then I saw it. One of those nightmares. It looked like a child's attempt to draw a human, twisted and stretched limbs on a too thin body, with a gaping cavernous hole where its face should have been. It danced over the waves, drawing closer to the boat. But when it got around 5 meters away, pale, almost human-like arms, with webbing stretching thinly between their outstretched fingers, reached out of the water and grabbed onto that monster, dragging it under the waves, where those all too familiar pale faces tore it to pieces. I tried to move my eyes away from this violent scene, and a strange feeling overtook me. My vision shifted and I looked back at the same scene, but I was now looking through the eyes of my younger self. I looked upwards, back to where my vision had been just a few moments ago, and I could just make it out, barely discernible, a faint outline of this massive shape towering over me. But a feeling of calm and safety overcame me. Everything slowly faded back to darkness. I found myself floating in the depths again, but I could now see them. Their pale bodies so close to human, but just not. Thin, pale limbs, thin membrane stretched between their fingers and toes. Sharp, thin fangs hanging from their mouths, and their pitch-black eyes. The creatures that have been bothering me the past few days. Thousands of them swim around me, while I could just make out the outline of something utterly massive swimming around this entire swarm. And it whispered again, "You are special. We care for you. Give him to us, and let us in. We will protect you." I awoke to a blood-curdling scream. I was standing below the airlock, but this time its doors were sealed, and something was inside of it, and it was making a racket. It screamed and banged on the steel walls, making the most terrifying sound. And then I heard it. "Please, God, please save me from that monster." It was Keith's voice. Keith's voice coming from inside the airlock. But another sound started to drown out his voice. "Give him to us. Give him to us. Give him to us." I looked down at the airlock's controls, my hand hovering over the panel. But I couldn't help myself. I gave in to the voices and pressed the button. A loud groan of metal echoed around the entire submarine, followed by silence. I stared at the airlock for a few moments, then turned around and walked back to the cockpit and sat down in my chair. I stared back into that darkness for a long time. But now I was never alone. They kept me company and whispered so many things to me. And this continued until I heard it. A loud metal clank, and the entire submarine started to rumble. A loud groan echoed out around me, and then silence. Soon blinding beams of light filled the room, and someone was shaking me, and then it tried to pull me away from the darkness. Once he pulled me from my chair, I leapt onto the man, slamming my fists into his face over and over. The dull, wet smacks of my fist echoed out, but I would not let them take me away from my new friends. But something hard slammed into my head, and everything went dark. I awoke in a brightly lit metal room. I looked around, and I was alone. I slowly sat up in the white metal bed. Shakily, I stood up and walked towards the door. It was shut tightly. I banged my hand onto the door, and a loud, static voice echoed around me. "Dr. Anders, you're safe now. We've recovered you from the crashed submersible and brought you back to port for treatment. You are currently in a hyperbaric oxygen room. We will be keeping you here for 2 days. A computer and a phone is available for your use." I blinked and started to panic. They took me back, away from my friends. I felt tears forming in my eyes, but then I heard it, faintly in the distance. "We're right here." Then tears started to leak from my eyes. The next 2 days passed quickly. I had about 1,000 calls, friends, family, Kyle. And then they let me out of the hyperbaric chamber. And I spent the next month going through about 1,000 tests. Apparently, I suffered a series of minor strokes, causing damage to my prefrontal cortex and my amygdala. But strangely, the damaged parts was filled in by some unidentifiable tissue. The doctors don't know what to make of it, and while they asked to do a biopsy, I completely refused it. There's no way I'm letting them go digging around in my brain just to satisfy their curiosity. Either way, after their observations, they say it appeared to be benign. And then came the military investigation. But they concluded that in the end, neither me nor Keith could be held responsible for any of our actions down there, since we had been delirious from a faulty pressure compensator. In the end, around 2 months since I embarked on that submarine journey, I found myself back in my small apartment, laying down on my old bed in the darkness. I would usually dread laying here, watching the creatures creep around my room. But now all I see in the darkness is a single pale face staring down at me. The face of my friend, and a faint whisper. "Sleep well." As I drifted into a deep and dreamless sleep. This continued for each night of that week, until the 7th day, when I had another dream. I found myself standing on a beach. Clean, white sand stretched out to infinity. Gentle, calming waves lapped at that endless beach. I found myself staring out across the ocean. But I heard a shuffling sound from behind me, and looked over my shoulder. A desolate land stretched out behind me. Empty, barren dirt holding dead trees, and a faint breeze wafted out, carrying with it the stench of rot. From that dead land they came, the nightmare creatures, shuffling out to me, a look of rapture on their twisted and horrid faces. But at my back I felt a cold hand press onto my shoulder, and a whisper. "We have protected you, but we grow weary. Let us feed, and we can keep you safe forever." I smiled and placed my hand gently over the cold pressure on my shoulder. "My friend, take whatever you need." I awoke that morning feeling great. but something on my arm stung. I lifted my arm up and held it above my head. 5 bloody trails ran down my arm, like I was scratched by a massive cat. The wounds were not deep, but it hurt nonetheless. I was quite confused about the wound, but if it was the price to pay for the tranquility that filled me ever since giving Keith to them, I could accept it. I stood up and walked over to the bathroom. I turned on the tap and gently rinsed the wound under cold water. But as I washed it, I noticed something hard caught in the back of one of the trails. I grabbed a pair of tweezers, latched onto the object, and gently yanked it out. It was strange. A bright pink and glittery fragment of something or another. It was quite weird, and I had no idea what it could be, so I just ignored it. I grabbed the bottle of disinfectant in the compartment behind my mirror, rubbed it over the wounds, and left the bathroom. Now, normally I would make breakfast, but this morning I was feeling particularly full, so I only made a cup of steaming coffee and took out my phone, perusing the local news headlines while I drank my coffee. But a particular headline startled me. Young girl brutally killed in animal attack. I opened the article. Sarah Brown, age 14, was found this morning at beach. She was torn to pieces. Large chunks of her body are missing. It is believed she was attacked by a starved animal. She was seen last night leaving with her friends. The article had a photo from her Instagram, showing her several hours before she was killed. But what stood out to me was the bright pink and glittery nail polish she was wearing. And I felt myself go cold, shattering the calm atmosphere of the room. I had stared into an abyss, and I took a piece of it with me. But now I'm terrified that it might be getting hungry.